Housing affordability is an economic crisis with broad-based implications. We're going to be talking about that in Technically Conversations. Hey, I am Chris Wink. I'm the CEO of the company that publishes Technically. We're a news organization that serves the community of professionals. We also publish a sister site, generosity.org, interested in social impact. And we're doing a bit of an interview series on the many systemic issues that go into economic opportunity. One conversation that is on many of our minds is housing affordability. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. I'm joined by Corinne O'Connell. She is the CEO of Habitat for Humanity Philadelphia. Corinne, thanks for being here.
It's great. This is a good day to be with you, Chris.
Because it's perhaps a decent segue. You have a bit of news here. This was not originally in our plans, but you were among the folks who got an exciting call from one of the most transformative philanthropists of our generation, whether you like that or not. It's enormous change, Mackenzie Scott. So you got a $5 million donation, part of a basket of dollars she gave across the country to Habitat Humanity group. So maybe start with me there. What's the setting in which you first get your $5 million Mackenzie Scott donation news?
So you couldn't script it better than how it happened. It was a Wednesday in mid-February, and I'm working at home, and I got a knock at the door from a Habitat homeowner, which has never happened before, and peculiar, right? Like, how'd you find me? And she said I had been on her mind, and she said she Googled me and wanted me to know, she's like, keep following your purpose and it's all going to be okay. Like, my family, we're happy, we're thriving, what have you. So, flummoxed, but also like, that's wonderful and thank you. And then 6:08 to be exact, that evening, I got an email that was somewhat cryptic and somewhat intriguing. That just that there was a philanthropist that was interested and had done some research and would I entertain a conversation. And then the next paragraph said something like, we recognize there are a lot of scams and hoax out there, but we won't ask for your social security number, which they do. And so then Friday, a program officer called from Mackenzie Scott's foundation and said, I work for so-and-so. We've been following and researching and done the due diligence, and we'd like to invest $5 million in the work you're doing at Habitat for Humanity Philadelphia. And I proceeded to say, like, I was like hyperventilating at this point. I was like, what? What is happening? Yeah. $5 million.
And yeah, give us that context for what does 5 million mean in the context of Habitat for Humanity Philadelphia, meaning one of the chapters.
So we're one.
How big of a number is that?
Well, Chris, to put it in.
Yeah, in context. Yeah.
It's the largest. It is the largest ever gift we have received as an organization in multiples.
Right.
First.
Right.
We have just nearly finished our own $5 million We Build Together campaign. And that has taken us 3.5, almost 4 years. We'll close out in June. And that
essentially doubles the
Correct.
capital campaign or the campaign you had running at this time.
So our campaign, we were at $5.7 million when I got that phone call in February, and it's taken us almost 4 years. And I said this to the program officer, I wouldn't change it for the world, right? That was our first ever campaign, and it was small gifts and medium gifts. And it was just, our donors have stepped up, foundations have stepped up, the work we're doing has stepped up, and then this phone call. So our campaign just went from 5.7 to $10.7 million.
So then let's turn to the bigger topic that I'm interested in here in a moment. Set us up. What does that, 10 million plus in funding between your existing We Build Together campaign and this new $5 million investment from Mackenzie Scott? What does that do for you?
So first, the response is a little bit of WD-40, right? Like, there is just a little bit of ease in every aspect of the business, right? Up until now, at every point, it has been, all right, how do we cobble to do A and put all of our financial capital into this basket on this, next project, this next thing. Meanwhile, saying no to all of these other things. That's a great idea. We'll get to that. We've got to, build the capital again to come back around to this. This type of capital allows us to have a few projects going. So I can give you an example. So it's an accelerant. I say WD-40, but also there's some E's right there of WD-40. It allows us to not pause. So up until now, and up until our own We Build Together campaign, when we have hit a roadblock, when funding has changed, when perhaps stuff through the city land bank, or when there has been a snag, we pause. It's sort of shuts the whole thing and delays and what have you. This type of capital allows us, we're right now out looking on the private real estate market for land. Yes, we're going to continue to pursue the city side and the land bank, and to have some capital to start. And it's not like tomorrow, Chris, suddenly we're going to start building 40 homes, but let's start to amass our own land so that we can start pre-development, get site acquisition on some of these projects, so that we can have a few in varying stages of bringing shovels to get in the ground. So that's on the new construction side. On the repair side, so we repair owner-occupied homes. In a similar vein, the funding we receive, and folks are generous, but it is often restricted. So we might get a bucket of money that says this is for porches. This is for veterans. This is only for veterans in West Philadelphia with front porches. Right? So the Mackenzie Scott gift is unrestricted. So if we're working in 19121 on the following 4 blocks, suddenly, right, as our teams are out and we're recruiting and we're getting folks who say, we need help, I need, this fix, that fix, what have you, suddenly our teams can go in and through the purview again of safe, warm, and dry, instead of having those restrictions of funding on the front end. It allows for more targeted, what is needed to be done in the home, more of it, and a response time there. So that's the other that I would add, is our runway is often about 18 months of just like, where are we? What's our budget? What's our cash flow? What have you? We actually now what's 36 months look like? What's 48 months? You said to the build team, don't stop. Just keep going. Just keep going. Get the next address, get the next home, get the next project going. Because the funding is there, as well as we continue to build our own engine of fundraising, which we've demonstrated through our We Build Together campaign. Folks are with us.
One big narrative, simplified as it may be, that has come out of the pandemic is housing crashes in the Great Recession. We lose a generation of laborers. There's consolidation in private market building development, and what was already perhaps a somewhat lower trajectory of building housing further slows. And then for a decade, we underbuild, and then we watch this both generational trends. Oh, millennials are suddenly buying houses, a bunch of these macroeconomic factors. And gosh, what was already a problem then gets worse, and the pandemic accelerates this idea of housing and affordability. I think it's worth us probably talking about, do we overcorrect? Because that tends to be what all big economies do. We swing between crises. We then speed up building, and then we're going to have a different collapse. But let's deal with one problem at a time. Talk to me a bit about your world. What does housing affordability do to poverty in a place like Philadelphia, but even nationally? You're part of obviously a very national, international nonprofit. What does housing affordability do to our issues of poverty and economic mobility?
So let's ground it in where we are as a city. 1 in 4 families in Philadelphia right now, every month, makes a choice. Am I paying rent or am I buying food? Am I paying a transit pass? Am I paying rent or mortgage, right? 1 in 4 families in Philadelphia, housing challenged. They pay more in where they live, way more than 30% of their income on where they live. So the need in Philadelphia, the gap, we know this, right? We know this. So now let's layer on here, Chris, the 2 years of the pandemic, where, this time 2 years ago, my God, remember April 2 years ago, we were in the lockdown. Well, that only works if you have a home that is healthy and safe. Kids for a whole year, right, year and a half, like home is home was the classroom. So I do think there is something that has emerged in this space, and you can see it, right? Like you and I are talking about economic impact and housing and social determinants of health. Like I do think there is now a spotlight that is on housing that has not been here, and it just continues to get brighter and more focused nationally, internationally on housing from a racial equity, right? How we as Philadelphia, how this chasm exists is because of systemic racism, is because of redlining. That cannot, like that is a, we have to name it. The gap, the racial wealth gap is enormous. And that is a piece of what Habitat, what the city, what we are faced to as a nation, the housing crisis, the affordable housing crisis. The other, in just naming the existing, is minimum wage in Pennsylvania, minimum wage in Philadelphia right now. I just texted my team because I want to be able to, it's 110 hours per week to afford a 2-bedroom apartment in Philadelphia, fair market value. That is not physically possible, right? Like just think about that at minimum wage. So all of this comes back to where we live sets us up to thrive in the classroom, in our jobs, as voting engaged, just even in our brains of executive function of like having a safe place to live. So at Habitat Philadelphia, we have this audacious vision. We have the housing stock in Philadelphia. We have it. It's falling down around people. There are 121,000 homes in Philadelphia that are owner occupied that need repairs. Right? So we are not going like Habitat Philadelphia, the city, like HUD, PHA, we are that dollar amount. Like when we talk about sort of like macro, micro, like we are never going to be able to afford, I shouldn't say never, but when you look at to build our way out of the affordable housing crisis we're in, we need to look at the landscape where we are and let's put the resources, let's get out of the way. Let's get the red tape out of the way, repair the homes, repair where people live, make them safe, warm, and dry.
And to clarify, you're noting that this is not just a story of new construction, but existing housing stock, particularly in a city like Philadelphia that does
Correct.
have older, and in some cases, homes with strong foundations, but have other issues. I want to let me actually, I just see a few comments on the live chat coming in, just noting this will be a familiar one to many folks. Someone watching notes, like, as many people have during the pandemic, opened up an app to start looking at buying a house and a reminder of those costs. You hit on an important point, Corinne, that in a lot of the literature, typically this rent burdened or housing burdened threshold of around 30% of total income going to housing. There's famously lots of reporting on limitations of housing vouchers. A lot of economists like housing vouchers as a program. It's proportional of income, but it's constrained for lots of funding mechanisms. Habitat has occupied for a long period of time, almost I think something like 50 years, playing a role in trying to answer this, as you alluded to, both through a important but smaller player on the new construction side, also trying to give tools and skills around renovations. We keep finding, like, this has been around for a while, the issue of housing affordability. I wonder if we could talk a little bit about, pull me out 50 years. It's gotten worse during Habitat's tenure. Is this like, what is that story for us? And as you look at coming up on, I think in the next few years, it's 50 years of Habitat, I believe, in the next handful of years.
So Philly started in 85. We built 244 and repaired over 700. And I don't have off the top of my head, Chris, you can pull. So globally there, and then in the United States, there's 1,100 habitats. So our impact is significant. Why it continues to, the crisis, why it continues like the tentacles and the grasp. I do think we have to, there's a retrospectiveness, and redlining and systemic racism sits at a pretty foundational crossroads. So when you think about who had access to capital, who could buy in what neighborhoods, and you overlay the maps, like the heat maps of Philadelphia, of crime, of, diabetes, heart conditions, health, like all of those maps, those heat maps light up in a very similar pattern to redlining. Take generational wealth and an intentional leaving behind. So without that generational wealth, right, like the ability to qualify for a traditional mortgage, like just the safety net, the financial safety net has intentionally been denied to folks of color. So then we, you know what I mean? Like it just continues to get at $7.25 an hour. Families who come into our program to buy a home often are working 2 jobs, minimum wage jobs, to make ends meet. They buy the home from Habitat, and that is a big misnomer. A lot of people are like, oh, it's sort of, like they get the home for free. No, they buy the home. It's a 30-year mortgage. We ensure that they pay no more than 30% of their income on that mortgage. And so, it might be a parent with 2 kiddos at $38,000 a year. So they've just gone from paying, let's call it $1,000, let's call it $1,200, right, in rent somewhere. Now their mortgage is $500, right? So now there's a $700 swing month over month for that family. And when you look at where then families, what that breathing room, and it's not lost on me that often families say, this is the first time I've been able to catch my breath. What then happens? The Habitat investment, to use, to talk economics, the return is a long one. It's not often that we see the parents go from, let's say, cleaning in an office or working for Allied Security. Like we don't often see them become the manager or, the senior program director. Where the return is those kiddos who grew up in that home, finishing high school, going to college, and then you can start to see, right, earning power. And then I could really wonk out on this as a housing geek, and I can hear my history and economics teacher talking about this. But when we think about here in Philadelphia and the wage gap, the skill gap, the workforce development that needs to happen, housing, as we try to solve for attracting and retaining talent to work here, as we think about it from an economy of Philadelphia that's emerging, or new economies, the workforce is here. We need to start in a place that people have an affordable, safe place to live, so that, right, they can go to CCP, they can do that vocational program, that sense of, tonight I have a place to put my head down that will be the same place the next night, allows for that, just breathing room to think a little bit ahead of, instead of how am I going to put food on the table tonight? Where am I going to sleep tonight?
I've seen the photos of you swinging a hammer. You get out there with volunteers and have to. I wonder how much for you and your role with hammer swinging on one side and lobbying for less restrictive zoning and development laws. I wonder where you think your biggest impact is on an affordability housing crisis, because we have this growing YIMBY movement, kind of the yes in my backyard, which is popularized particularly in the superstar cities that have recognized restricting construction is the opposite of what we want. We want, at this point in history, what will happen in the next 5 to 10 years. We'll see what these videos look like 5 to 10 years from now. But at this moment, sitting here, we need considerably more housing to meet demand, which should theoretically reduce costs and try to limit how many people are in that housing burden crisis trap. Tell me, how much do you think about the regulation and zoning and other issues to speed up private market business? Because so much more construction is not happening under Habitat's
I
balance
think
kind of
it's
thing
an,
I'm
I
getting
think you're, mine is an and both,
at. Yeah.
right? We need to continue to accelerate what Habitat, right? So we're the only affordable home ownership program in Philadelphia.
Mm.
Where the federal dollars and the state dollars have shifted is into rental, new market tax credits, and they're needed, right? I'm not saying, like it's a spectrum, it's a continuum
Hmm.
of the marketplace, and our voice, the it's interesting. We're a member of the Building Industry Association. We're a member of
Hmm.
the, GBCA, like, as we should be, right? We are a builder. We're an economic driver in this city, and also bringing, our perspective, our experience to that table, and thinking about how do we partner, right? So with a private builder, what would it look like, and what would it take that 40 units are market rate, but the private builder sees the value of 10 of them then being affordable. And or Habitat in Austin, this is pretty incredible. They are now in a place, and it's worked through some of their zoning and a lot of the advocacy space. So Habitat Austin is both building, but is also has a pipeline where they're educating and preparing home buyers. So the private developers, right, with some of the zoning inclusionary
Hmm.
stuff that has happened in Austin, they have to have a certain number of units be affordable, and Habitat Austin is providing that home buyer.
Hmm.
So I think we're at a space where we can think and imagine differently, and it is going to require, compromise on both sides and some real creativity about how we could do this differently. Yeah,
Hmm.
it is there. The opportunity, the possibility to do it differently is there. I think will is shifting. Um, and it's going to shift, I think, from opportunity to even more of like, we have to. Bringing it back to some of these others that we talked about, right? Like, one of the top reasons kids miss school in Philadelphia is because of asthma.
Mm.
Where they live makes them sick,
Hmm.
right? So as we're looking at public education and how to recognizing that, a knowledge workforce is required to earn more than $7.25 an hour. But if kids can't get to school to learn because where they live, right? So it comes back to housing.
Hmm.
And I think that's one of our biggest challenges here in Philadelphia as the, poorest of the 10 largest cities.
We are well over time, so I can maybe send you off with a bit of a softball, I suspect. But no, I mean, tell me a little bit about coming. I'm not allowed to say coming out of the pandemic, but wherever we are in the pandemic, don't yell at me. But how optimistic are you
Mm.
about the future of cities?
So I don't want to, I don't want to ever say I've taken off my rose-colored glasses, right? In who I am and how I lead, and the organization I work alongside, it requires an optimism. It requires a tenacity to keep going. And I think the pandemic has peeled back layers that have always been here that we now cannot look away from, and require all of us, right? It requires sort of that buckling down or doubling down in a space of a commitment to do it differently, a commitment of resources, a commitment to remove barriers. What have we done just because we did it that way before that we can, like, just get it out of the way? And I'll wrap with this. This is something we've looked at, Chris. The sweat equity hours, we used to require families to do 350 hours of sweat equity, right? Hours working out on site in the classroom to buy their home. But through the pandemic and through the racial reckoning of the last 2 years, we recognize that that's actually a barrier that Habitat Philadelphia created to slow down and prevent folks from acquiring, accessing, buying their home. A mom working 2 jobs with 350 hours on top of that is a barrier. We did it, it's just like this legacy thing that we had always done. But over the pandemic, it was like, pause, like, hang on one second. Does this make sense? Like, this is a barrier. So we've shifted it to 125 hours, really gotten clear on purpose with 75 of those hours focused on financial literacy. We want that family to be able to successfully manage that mortgage over the lifetime of that home. So I think, again, like, then to pull back as a city and as a nation, where are there places where that legislation or that barrier or that policy was put in place 50, 60, 30 years ago that can be removed? And or as we look moving forward, how can we uncomplicate things, recognizing that, it's housing first. The other tentacles of poverty will lessen a bit if people have a safe, affordable place to live.
I've taken us well over, so I'm going to have to make that the end. Corinne O'Connell is CEO of Habitat for Humanity Philadelphia. Congrats on your big investment news. You're tackling a crucial issue, so thanks for the work that you guys are doing. Corinne, I appreciate you for being here.
Awesome. Good to be with you. I'll come back.
Oh yeah, we'll talk soon. That's this week's conversation with Technically and Generosity. We'll catch you next week. Thanks everybody. Bye.